Hi guys, and welcome to my basic skills series video on making a Swiss roll sponge. The first thing I need to do is preheat my oven to 200 degrees, and I've just done that. The next step is to grease and line a Swiss roll tin. So I've got a Swiss roll tin here, and I've got some oil and a pastry brush in this mug. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just get some oil on my brush, and I'm going to grease the bottom and the sides of the Swiss roll tin fairly lightly. I'm just making sure that I'm taking my brush, I've got oil on my brush, and I'm taking it round every corner and edge of the Swiss roll tin and over the bottom of the Swiss roll tin. This is going to help our greaseproof paper stick to the tin. So that's my first lot of oil. I'm going to get myself a piece of baking paper, and that is going to sit on top of the Swiss roll tin like so. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a pair of scissors, and I'm going to cut each corner. I'm just going to snip into that corner by a couple of inches. Like so. Turn it round carefully, a bit tight for space here, and snip again the corners. And by doing this cutting, it's going to make sure that the paper fits nice and snugly into the tin so that our Swiss roll has a good shape, a good solid rectangular shape. So once you've cut the corners, you're just going to press the paper down into the tin, and I'm just going to use my fingertip here all the way around like so to just press the paper into the edges of the tin, and that is my Swiss roll tin nicely lined. The next thing I'm going to do is put a bit more oil on. Now the reason for this oil is to stop the sponge from sticking to the paper. So the Swiss roll sponge is a fatless sponge. It doesn't have any butter or margarine or oil in the sponge itself, so it can be quite prone to sticking. So we need to make sure we've got a decent amount of oil on top of the paper so that it's not going to stick to the paper. Don't be shy with the oil. You will not taste it. Your cake won't have a greasy texture because it'll just absorb through the sponge, but you really do need this oil so that your sponge doesn't stick to the paper. If your sponge sticks to the paper, when you try and take it out of the oven and remove the paper, your sponge will just break. So you need to make sure you've got plenty of oil on top of the paper, like so. All the way around. All of the corners and the edges. It's really important that you get the corners and the edges because these can be the tricky parts of the paper to pull away. So a nice even spread of oil, and I'm just going to pop this out the way. Then we are going to sieve our flour and cocoa. So I'll just move this behind me just now. And we have here our ingredients. So we've got 3 medium eggs cracked into a glass or metal bowl with 75 grams of caster sugar. We have 60 grams of self-raising flour and 15 grams of cocoa powder. So in this case, I am making a chocolate Swiss roll sponge, but if you wanted to make a plain one, instead of 60 grams of self-raising flour and 15 grams of cocoa, you would just go for the full 75 grams self-raising flour if you want to make a plain one. First thing we need to do is we need to sieve the flour and cocoa powder. And I'm going to do this onto a plate that's got a paper towel on it. So I'm just going to pour all of that into my sieve. And just very gently, not from too high a height, because I want to try and get all of this on the paper towel. Very gently just tap the sieve against the side of your hand, and if you've got a few lumps of cocoa powder or flour in the bottom of your sieve, just use the back of a spoon to help push them through. Now there's a couple of reasons why we sieve the mixture. One is to remove any lumps like I've just demonstrated with the cocoa powder, and the other is when we sieve ingredients we actually add air into the mixture, so it helps our sponge to rise in the oven. So that's us sieved that once. The next thing we're going to do is go back to our eggs and sugar, and we're going to whisk these. The whisking process for a Swiss roll sponge is absolutely vital. What the whisking process is going to do is it's going to add loads and loads of air to the sponge. So it's aeration that is happening. We're adding loads of air into the eggs, which is going to help our sponge to rise and be nice and light. So I'm just going to plug this electric whisk in. And I'm going to whisk the mixture together. You probably will end up whisking for at least 5, possibly even 10 minutes to get this to the right consistency. And I'll show you what I mean by the right consistency when I get there. So I'm going to turn the whisk on. What to do, put your whisks into the mixture before you turn them on. That'll help save it splashing out of the bowl and onto you. Hold on to your bowl and turn the whisks up high as they go, like so. You may notice that I am moving the whisk and I'm turning the bowl. The more you move the whisk, the more work you put into it, the quicker you will get the desired consistency. Okay, so I'm now going to test my mixture and see if it's ready. Hopefully you can see the mixture has more than doubled, possibly even tripled in size, and that is all of the air that I've added to the ingredients by whisking them. It's also now very pale in colour, it's almost white in colour. You can see all these lovely air bubbles as well. It's also thickened a lot, and that's how we're going to test whether it's ready or not. So what to do, if you dip your whisks in, swirl them around a little bit, and then draw a number 8 on the top of your mixture, it should sit for a few seconds without immediately sinking into the mixture. So you draw your number 8, leave it to sit for a few seconds, and it shouldn't sink straight into the mixture. If it doesn't sink straight into your mixture and it sits on top of the mixture for a few seconds, then your mixture is well enough whisked and ready to go. So I'm going to carefully pop out my electric whisks. Just pop them over to the sink for cleaning, and I'll show you the next step. So the next step on our recipe is to then sieve the flour and cocoa again. So we are double sieving the mixture, and the reason for that, as I said, is that when you sieve flour, as it falls through the sieve and into your mixture, it picks up air as it falls. So it helps us to add even more air into our mixture. So I'm going to very carefully pick it up from my paper towel and just slowly and gently ease it into the sieve, like so. And then I can lift it a little bit higher this time and just really slowly and gently tap the sieve against the side of your hand, and just do this slowly so you don't end up with all of your flour and cocoa powder all over the table instead of in your mixture. And it should go through the sieve really easily this time because we've already got rid of any lumps. Okay, then we are going to fold the dry ingredients in. So there are 2 different pieces of equipment or utensils that you can use for folding. You can use a spatula, or you can use a metal tablespoon. Now, I am going to use the metal spoon because I prefer this, and there are two methods of folding. The first method is to circle round the edge and then cut through the middle, like so. And you can see I'm doing this really, really gently. The other method of folding is to do a figure of 8. So you start at the side and you draw a figure of 8 with your mixture. And the purpose of folding rather than whisking or just beating it in is that it's very, very gentle. What we don't want to do at this stage is beat out all of that wonderful air that we've incorporated into the mixture. So we must be gentle, patient, and slow in this process. So take your time. I like to use a combination of both methods. So some round the side of the bowl and cut through the middle, and some figure of 8. And you just slowly keep doing that gently until all of the dry ingredients are nicely incorporated into your mixture. What it should look like at the end is a bit like chocolate mousse. So that's the kind of end consistency that you're aiming for here. Make sure you're scraping the bottom of the bowl and lifting any flour or cocoa powder from the bottom of the bowl up into the mixture. And you don't want to overdo this, so as soon as you think it's all incorporated and it looks like chocolate mousse, stop. What to do then is just check the bottom of the bowl all the way round and make sure you've not got any pockets of dry flour or cocoa powder at the bottom there that haven't been mixed through properly. And then we can get this mixture into your Swiss roll tin. So I'll bring my lined Swiss roll tin back, and I'm just going to pour all of this mixture into the centre of the Swiss roll tin. And this is where, oh, there's a little pocket of flour and cocoa powder in there, which I didn't notice, so I'll just mix that through while it's in the bowl. And at this point, I'm going to use a spatula to help me scrape the remaining mixture out of the bottom of the bowl. So I've got my spatula here, and I'm going to use that to scrape the bottom of the bowl like so. Waste not, want not. Try and get as much of that mixture out of the bowl as you can. And then I'm going to use the back of the spoon, or you could use your spatula to spread it out. You can also tilt your tray slightly to help you with this. And again, you want to be really gentle with your spreading. You don't want to be pushing that air out. So just nice and light with your hands, and just ease the mixture into the corners and into the sides of the tin. You want to make sure it's reasonably flat, and then we are ready for the oven. So I'm going to use my oven gloves, and this is going to go in the oven for 8 to 10 minutes. So I'm going to set a timer for 8 minutes and then test it for readiness. Okay, so I've just removed my Swiss roll sponge from the oven. Mine took exactly 9 minutes, and the way to test it for readiness is to use a skewer, insert it into the middle of your Swiss roll sponge, and your skewer should come out clean if the sponge is cooked through to the middle. It should also be well risen, and it should be just slightly darker in colour. So I've just left that sitting on a pot stand to just cool very, very slightly, and I'm going to prepare to remove it from the tin. So what I need is a little bit of caster sugar again. I'm going to pop some on a spoon. I've got another piece of greaseproof paper, and I'm just going to sprinkle caster sugar as evenly as I can over the greaseproof paper. A little bit more from here. Just like so. And what this sugar is going to do is it's going to help to stop my hot Swiss roll sponge from sticking to this paper. So I'll go and get my Swiss roll sponge and we'll flip it out over onto this piece of greaseproof. So I'm using the oven gloves here, and I'm just going to very carefully tip this out onto the sugared greaseproof, and then I'm going to move my Swiss roll tin out of the way. And the next step is a little bit fiddly. This is where we're going to remove the lining paper from the sponge. So I'm just making sure that's all untucked. And what I'm going to do now is very slowly and carefully, starting with the corners, because these are the most fiddly bits, starting with the corners and the edges, just very slowly start to ease the paper away from the sponge. So corners and edges first, and then you should be able to slowly and carefully peel the paper back, like so. I'm getting nervous now, you see. Last little bit, I don't want it to break. There we go, perfect. Put the lining greaseproof in the bin. And there we have it, a Swiss roll sponge. You can use this for a number of different things. I'm going to be putting up a video tutorial for a chocolate orange bar gateau, which is a nice way to use a Swiss roll sponge. You can cut out little circles from it and use them to make little torts, or you can simply fill it with jam or cream and roll it up to make a Swiss roll. Normally with a Swiss roll sponge, just to tidy it up and neaten it, we just trim the edges away very slightly. Okay, and I'm using a bread knife for that. And this just takes away the rough edges so that we've got a nice, even sponge all the way around. And just be careful while you're doing this, because the sponge is very delicate, so you don't want to end up tearing it. And I'm just collecting those ends on a paper towel. You can put them in the bin, or you can eat them if you wish. There we go. And just turn it around once more. And this should give us a perfect rectangle sponge. So as I said, you can use this to make the chocolate bar gateau, which there is a video tutorial for on our YouTube, or you can use it to make torts or a Swiss roll. Just a reminder, if you're going to be putting cream in the middle of your Swiss roll or onto this sponge, you need to wait until the sponge cools completely, because if you put cream, whipped cream on this just now, it'll just melt and it kind of melt into the sponge. So make sure you cool it down if you are using cream.